Devi Yaka over here. And what I want to do is, rather than stopping, let me just quickly take us up to Mirabai and 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 more or less terminate there with a very short discussion of Narsi Mehta. But I do want to look at Mirabai a little bit here. So here is, I would say, probably next to Tulsi Das. So if Tulsi Das, Ramcharitmanas is a venerated text, not just in North India, in the Hindi speaking world, uh, but it's actually venerated in many parts of the Indian diasporic population, particularly the older Indian diasporic population that came from that Bhojpuri speaking belt, that Hindi belt in UP, Bihar, that part of the world, and went to places like Suriname and Fiji and Trinidad and Guyana in the 19th century, right? These are Indians who had gone there to all these sugar colonies and to work on the plantations as indentured laborers. They carried the Ramcharitmanas with them in their heart. When I went to Fiji 2020, 2 years ago, I would, then Indian would say to me, "This is Manas country." Manas country. He would point to a large area and say, "This is Manas country," meaning this is where the Ramcharitmanas is a venerable text where people know this text by heart, right? So that's one text. But in North India, you also have, I think, Mirabai is probably, I would say, the most well known of the Krishna Bhakts, along with Surdas. And her Krishna is a particular kind of Krishna. So this is, by the way, the cover, of course, as you can tell from this. Number 535, I think, is of this in the Amar Chitra Katha comic series, and they had a whole one on Mirabai. This would be the most common representation. You look at, by the way, look at the representation of Krishna himself. I mean, this is, I wouldn't describe this as a very masculine kind of God, right? I mean, this is the kind of thing that would have sent Bankim Chandra Chatterjee into rage, because he would have said, "What kind of God is this? He looks like a effeminate person, looks rather womanly for a Hindu god." And he's always got the flute. She has her own instrument. She sings, right? She sings and she performs, and she sings before the image of Krishna in the temple. Um, so in that sense, the cover really evokes what is the dominant image. And here again, you see this is a painting that was done by the Baps. This is the Swami Narayan people in one of their books for children, to explain the Hindu tradition to children, Gujarati children growing up in the Swami Narayan sect. And there's one of the paintings from one of their books that they've done for children. And here you have, once again, Mirabai, and their, um, you know, she's very often shown, um, in the uh, role of a performing musician, singing her own compositions. Um, um, and once again, it's very important to say that, look, uh, there is a substantial body of scholarship which is about which compositions are really hers and which have just been attributed to her. I mean, there are legends that she wrote hundreds and thousands of songs. Well, I mean, scholars have only verified, literally, a few dozen. Often with many of these people, many of them were written by disciples, many of them were written in the style, many of them imitated her deliberately. That goes true. That holds true for many of the bhaktas. So she is Krishna's devotee, likely dates 1498 to 1546. She's a daughter of a Rajput chief by the name of Ratan Singh, who and born in or around a place called Martha, which is a fortress city founded by her grandfather, around 40, 50 miles northeast of Ajmer. So I would say, 3, 4 hours from Delhi. 4 hours from Delhi. Her mother died when she is around 4 or 5 years old. Um, but she is described, according to the sources, as someone who was a devotee of Krishna from her childhood. And one of her verses, she says, "Oh Krishna, did you ever rightly value my childhood love?" Right, where she's almost like admonishing him that, now you know me as your devotee, but do you know that I have always been your devotee since I was a young girl? Now, the household of her father was, of her grandfather was Vaishnava. It was a Vaishnava household, which is to say that it's very likely that Krishna himself was worshipped as a supreme god there. They might have worshipped Vishnu rather than Krishna, or or maybe Ram, but it was certainly a Vaishnava household. And she is put in the care of her male relatives, um, um, uh, particularly after the death of her mother had passed away, and then the death of her father. And her uncle marries her off to a man by the name of Bhojraj, who is the heir apparent to the throne of the warrior Rana Sangha of the house of Sisodia. So this is one of the great Rajput clans. So she's married into, because she herself comes from a Rajput family. So she's an aristocratic lineage, right? Her husband dies um, in January 1528 in a battle with the Emperor Babur. So the Babur had established a Mughal, would become known as the Mughal Empire in 1526. And there are these constant conflicts with the Rajput clans, and so her husband dies in one of these battles. And she is going to start encountering some difficulties. One of the questions that has come up in the scholarship is whether after the death of her husband, her relatives expected her to commit sati, whether they expected that she would become a sati. So, but the word sati, by the way, refers both to the act and the woman herself. So the woman herself is a sati, and the act of widow immolation is also called sati. So that there was a question of whether she would become a sati, and some of these sources have suggested. But again, it depends on whether these sources are hostile to her or favorable to her, because sometimes they can be sources that may be hostile for various reasons. Um, uh, and it's not entirely certain whether they did expect her to commit sati, because Rajput women often did. All right. So she visits the temple frequently and starts dancing there before Krishna's image. And very briefly, and then we look at some of her compositions quickly, that, after the death of her husband, another younger male relative is said to have locked her into a room. Why? Because he wanted to bring her to her senses, because she was spending too much time in the temple. There were rumors going around that she goes to the temple and she's kind of always in this trance-like state where she's singing to Krishna and imagining that he's her lover, her husband, and all of that. So he attempts to poison her. Um, we'll see a composition that speaks to this. As I've said, it suggested that her relatives expected her to commit sati, or self-immolation. And Mirabai herself writes in one of her poems, "Sati, I will not commit sati." So, all right. Um, I will sing the songs of Girdar. Girdar or Giridhar is another name for Krishna. This is the Krishna who holds the mountain. All right. So an Indian god can be known by myriad names, right? Sometime around 1538, she arrives in Vrindavan, where she is going to spend most of the remainder of her life before moving shortly before her death to Dwarka. Dwarka is where Krishna is supposed to have um, died. So that's why she moves to Dwarka. But this is not known for certain. All right, this is not known for certain. And then there's that anecdote where I had read out to you earlier, where she reprimands Jiva Goswami um, for imagining that because she's a woman, he refuses to meet with her, right? And so she reprimands him. I used to think that the Lord Krishna was the only man in Vrindavan, and that all the rest of the inhabitants are gopis. The gopis are these cowherdesses, right, with whom Krishna dallies. Now I've discovered that there's someone else here besides Lord Krishna who thinks of himself as a man. And there are different traditions. Some of them say that she met with Chaitanya. Chaitanya is a figure we are not looking at, and this modern Hare Krishna movement that you've heard of, officially called the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. So the founder of this modern movement, Swami Prabhupada, uh, Srila Prabhupada, who passed away 2-3 decades ago. I don't remember exactly when. He traces his descent back to Chaitanya. But Chaitanya is one of the great devotional figures coming out of Eastern India. And different traditions say that she met Chaitanya, she met Tulsidas, she met Akbar and Tansen. But none of this has ever been authenticated. There are various problems in the chronology, and then even her passing in 1546 is not entirely certain. Now, images of her proliferate, all over, I would say, North India, large parts of Western India. Um, Posters, uh, very colorful posters. You go to any of these markets that is held in neighborhoods. And Delhi has hundreds of them, and very often they'll sell these huge posters, 30, 40, 50 rupees. And 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 you will see posters of Mirabai, Krishna. This is actually a Raja Ravi Verma oleograph. Raja Ravi Verma is an Indian painter who becomes quite important in various ways in the late 19th, early 20th century. And he took these themes and popularized them with these prints. The print quality was very high. This is one of these. You can see the resemblance it bears to the earlier images that we had seen Krishna hovering behind her, but here's Krishna himself here as well. And actually you can see the way the print has been done. I mean, they're sort of like, echo each other almost, right? They almost echo each other. And here again, you can see this is why Hindu nationalists are actually very uneasy with their own faith, because they look at a god like Krishna and say, well, he looks like a, beautiful young person, and sometimes looks, kind of womanly and everything. But this the way the print orchestrates their images, the musical instruments, uh, and it gives a certain kind of an aura, right, to the subject here. I just wanted to show you a little bit of a little close up of that, and you can analyze this at greater length when you have the PowerPoint. So, what are some of her compositions? And again, I've given the titles because the songs don't, the compositions don't have titles. Usually, when you see them in a book, they're numbered. So, mere to giridhar Gopal dusra na koi, jaake sir mor mukhut मेरो पति सोई, right? So Hindi अर्थ, meaning in Hindi. So मीरा कहती है, मेरे तो सब श्री कृष्णा हैं, जिसने पर्वत को उंगली पर उठाकर गिरिधर नाम पाया. So मेरे तो बस, there is only Sri Krishna for me. There's only Krishna for me, right? So what did he do? He basically lifted on his finger that whole mountain. Okay, and that is how he gained his name. उसके अलावा मैं किसी को अपना नहीं मानती. Besides him, I do not acknowledge anyone. जिसके सिर पर मोर का पंख का मुकुट है, वही है मेरे पति. He on whose head is the crown of peacock feathers, that alone is my husband. Right? And recall how it echoes back in a way, you think of it, right? To Mahadevi Yakka. Husband inside, lover outside. I can't manage them both. There's only one for me. There's only one for me. I might be married in real life, but my real lover, my real husband is Shiva, she's saying. And of course, for Mirabai, it is Krishna. And what I'm doing here is I'm also showing you how popular religiosity works in this society, right? What are the ways in which religiosity percolates into the pores of Hindu society? So these are prints. You can go on the internet. This is off the internet. So, and you can see there's a standard set of representations over there, and then they'll very often have that that couplet, as you do in this poem over here. All right. So it's the one that's the one that I just read to you. I should have put it before that. And here's another poem. So this is a very famous composition. We don't have the time to actually listen, which is ideally what you should do if you were to actually sort of read these poems. Then what I would suggest you do is you go to Google, and I can give you some recommendations for who's singing. But M.S. Subbalakshmi, um, Bharat Ratna, right? Well, she's received the highest distinction given only to 40, 50 Indians since independence. Um, Majestic singer, and she has done lots of renditions of Mirabai's bhajans. Okay, so bhajan is the devotional composition. That's what they're known as in North India. And so I suggest you to read it, look at the translation, and then listen to it as well. All right. So for Mirabai, I mean, there are many others as well. Kumar Gandharv is another one, singing in a very different style, but also a classical musician. So let's just look at this one over here. And because the rest of what I have on Mirabai is more or less of this tenor, we'll omit that and stop there so that you can ask a few questions and then wind up. So, pag घुंघरू बांध मीरा नाची रे, मैं तो मेरे नारायण की आपाई हो गई दासी रे, लोग कहे मीरा भाई बावरी, न्यात कहे कल नासी रे, विष का प्याला राणा जी भेजा, पीवत मोरा हासी रे. All right. मीरा के प्रभु गिरिधर नागर सहज मिले अविनाशी रे. So, pag gungru band mira nachi re, tying anklets to her feet. Gungru is the anklets, right? Band, tie, right? Mira nachi re, tying the anklets to her feet. Mira dances, speaking about herself, right? मैं तो मेरे नारायण is my God, my Vishnu, that is in this case Krishna, कि आप ही हो गई दासी रे. I have become a slave to my Krishna, right? And then she says over here that Vish ka pyara Rana ji bheja, right? So the king sent a goblet of poison as a gift. It's like what Socrates was given, right? He was given hemlock to drink, poison to drink. And I drank it all in one gulp and laughed, right? Vish ka pyala Rana ji bheja. Vish ka pyala, that's the vish is poison, the cup of poison. Rana ji, the king sent. I drank it, pivat hasi re, and then I laughed, right? Trying anklets to her feet and abandoned Meera dance. And very often, and there are further portions here which I have a little bit more of the translation there. People say, look, Meera, the crazy woman. This is what they said about Mahadevi Yakka, who used to go around the streets naked, apparently, right? Relatives say, look, destroyer of the clan's respect. Look at this woman without virtue, without morality. She goes around, because a woman doesn't go around, the marketplace, doesn't wander around the streets, doesn't sing like this, right? And Meera says, to use a colloquialism, to hell with all of that, right? That's what this poem is really about. And there are many such compositions, and this is another kind of these posters that really circulates in the marketplace here. You notice that I have alluded to the fact that many of these compositions of the Bhakta poets refer to the commerce. So you see, they're reflecting something about their society too. That society has become more materialistic. People are busy buying, selling, the marketplace. right? All of that, right? Right. So this poem here is about uses these metaphors to explain what's happening, but she's going to, of course, give it a twist to really speak about um, how she is being transported to a different life by having accepted Krishna as her own God. Right? That's what this poem is going to be about. And there are many compositions which are in a similar vein. So I think we'll stop there because we've really gone on now. Even we started 15 minutes late, but we're already past 3 hours. I've been allowing for that. But I can, if you have some questions, I can take those.
Sure. So one is, that poem you showed about her drinking poison. What was the meaning behind that? I didn't understand that.
Oh, okay. So you see, the thing is that see there the legend is that because she was viewed as somebody who was disgracing the family, right? She's disgracing the family. She's disgracing the family, the clan, because she's a married woman who's become a sati. So the first question is whether she was expected to commit sati, and she refused to do so. That I'm not going to be a sati, just because my husband has died. I'm not going to sit in the funeral pyre with my deceased Rajput husband. And then she, because what happens to, by the way, what happens to the Hindu widow, right? The Hindu widow is supposed to become a complete ascetic, a complete ascetic. And that's, even today, in principle, in principle, the Hindu widow is goes to a place like Mathura or Banaras, Varanasi, only dresses in white, has to give up jewelry, has to give up meat, all of that, right? And lead a life of pure asceticism. Now, she, on the other hand, is going around the town. She's singing, she's like a mad woman. She's singing about, and she's saying that I'm really married to Krishna. So people are saying, look at this mad woman. And members of her Rajput family who like to keep their women in seclusion are saying she's disgracing the family. So they send her a pot, they send her a cup of poison. You drink the poison. And she drinks it merrily. You see, that's the point, that you can't, you see, if you were saying, if you were arguing from the point of view of history, then you say, oh, well, if she drank the cup of poison, didn't she die? How come she's still around singing? What happened? Do we know? No, you see, those questions don't matter. Though it's what matters here is she's saying, I'm indifferent. People can say what they want to say about me. I am devoted to God. I am devoted to God. Krishna is everything to me. I am obsessed with him. He fills my life. There is a transcendent pleasure that I get. What do I have to do with the commerce of the marketplace where people are yakking, 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 buying, selling? What are these constraints of material life? I have nothing to do with that, right?
And
The cup of poison is only the most extravagant form of that endomaterialism, that because she's viewed as a disgrace, they try to get rid of her. But
and
of course, there is nothing in the history or the biography, as it were, of Mirabai, which tells us that if she had it, that, well, she died. No, because according to the story, she then goes, she actually leaves that area, then she moves to Vrindavan, and then she moves to Dwarka. Why did she move to Dwarka? Because she wanted to spend the end of her life in a place that is associated with Krishna. And Vrindavan was associated with Krishna, right? It's not an accident where she goes. Is that
and
clear?
yeah, and do we know if her let's just say, dedication to Krishna, did it happen after her husband passed away? Do we know that or not?
No, no, it happened before. You see, remember here that if you look at this slide over here, that she says in some of her poems, "Oh Krishna, did you ever rightly value my childhood love?" That she was a devotee from the time that she was very young. This the likelihood is that the house of her grandfather, where she was raised after she lost her mother, right, was almost certainly a Vaishnava household. So the likelihood is that they were Krishna devotees, but they were not Krishna devotees in the extreme way in which she was a Krishna devotee. They were Krishna devotees in much in the way in which tens of millions of Indians are Krishna devotees or Ram devotees, bhaktas today, correct? So she may have imbibed her love of Krishna and become a Krishna bhakt at her grandfather's home. But she certainly says in some of her compositions that, Krishna, did you know that I have been a devotee of Krishna from the outset? Now, you see what may be lurking behind your question, correct me if I'm wrong, is because your question was, did she become a Krishna devotee after she lost her husband? Right? Then she says, okay, now I can turn to the devotional life, because the implicit question there is, why did she even agree to get married? If she already she herself saw herself as actually married to Krishna. And the reason for that is very simple. I mean, this is a woman in 16th century India. How much freedom did a woman have to do what she wanted to do? How much freedom do women in India have what they want to do today? Most women, right? The family would have said, well, you need to be married now, right? This is as once in a while you see this cynically in a text. In India, this is a solution to everything, particularly to an errant child wants to become a saint. Just get that person married off, and that will bring them back to real life. Right? This is the solution to every problem. In the Hindi film, that was always the case. When the young man is errant, not is too much of a town rascal, spends too much time loitering on the streets. Well, just get him married, because the idea is you get a person married, then they have children, they learn the virtues of responsibility, right? So she would have been told, you have to be married, and of course she didn't have the power to object. But the supposition is, from all her compositions, that she was only married to him in the flesh. That is to say, she was only married to him pro forma, because she always saw herself as married to Krishna. Married to Krishna. And by the way, we don't even know, for example, if the marriage was actually consummated. She certainly does not appear to have had any children from her marriage to a Rajput um, husband.
Got it. And this whole bhakti movement in this 15th, 16th century, where there's seems to be a lot of concentration um, of literature, or um, is it? I know I asked this before, but was there particular circumstances then that you think led to this proliferation?
Well, I think that one thing that did lead to it, possibly two or three, but one thing certainly was that you see, I think that the paths were set for most people. Either you're a Hindu or you're a Muslim. Okay, I mean, we're using these as broad general categories, right? Because if you ask me, well, what about the Jains? Yeah, but they're very small in number, right? And we know that Jains were generally confined to a few parts of India. Sikhism, of course, is going to come into being after Guru Nanak. Um, and it's going to take a time before the religion becomes truly established, if I may put it this way. Uh, Certainly, and if you look at Kabir, he refers to the the Muslims, and he refers to the Hindus, the Pandits, and that therefore he's referring to the Hindus. Um, and I think that this was certainly a consideration, uh, because you see here, you could say that, well, it doesn't this fall within Hinduism, right? But you see, this is what I meant. This is a departure from the established path. Questions of caste, questions of material life, questions of material power. Because when you generally read the history of Hindus and Muslims interaction, then let's say you do the political history. So then you say, okay, so was a place under Muslim rule, what were the consequences for Hindus living there? If a place was under Hindu rule, what were the consequences for Muslims living there? That those may not be the right questions, because we shouldn't assume that under Muslim rule Hindus suffer disproportionately, nor should we assume that under Hindu rule Muslims suffer disproportionately. But I'm saying many people would be inclined to think that way. And there were people at that point who are really, in a sense, encrusted in their religious habits. So that these communities are now becoming consolidated in some ways, they're becoming somewhat distinct. There may be enormous differences within Islam, enormous differences within Hinduism. The second thing obviously has to do with the fact that now I think, we're really talking about the fact that there is going to be considerable turmoil at this period. Things are starting to become unsettled slowly. They're going to become even more unsettled later on. But remember now, at this point, we haven't really brought, because for example, the Portuguese. See, your question is not just about Mirabai. Your question is about the 15th, 16th century. Now, 15th, 16th century things are happening. So you've got the Mughal Empire, you've got the Portuguese have come into India, European powers are starting to come, Sikhism has arisen as a new faith, right? There is what specific kind of churning there was at that point in time is really the question that is is behind what you're probing. Okay. And I'm saying that there are a number of different considerations here. That's why I deliberately brought in a couple of the points, because there's so many compositions there, right? But look at these metaphors of commerce. There is a body of people who are thinking that if we're trading really in metaphors of commerce all the time, right? The material life has become more and more important, and there are people who are saying that we need a way out of this. I'm putting it in a very colloquial way, a very colloquial fashion. So just for a moment, think of our own times. There are people you hear about who opt out. They say, hey, I'm not interested in making money. I'm not interested in contributing to consumption. I'm I'm very happy with the $20,000 I make, and I don't need a home. I don't need a car. There are people who opt out. You can think of these people as opting out, but opting out in a particular way. And by the way, people who opt out today, and then people in the late 60s who opted out, what did they do? The hippie generation. What did they do? They went to India. Why did they go to India? Because it was a country which had a history of people opting out. So I'm transposing this to you in a very modern language. These
Mm.
are people who have said, uh, the material life is taking over everything. It's
Mm.
taking over everything. And I think this idea will always be there. And I think particularly when societies become particularly materialistic, I think you've seen this. There are stages that every society goes through. You're seeing this again here now. I mean, that there are people in the younger generation who are very agitated by climate change, extremely agitated by it. And there are people who have in principle dedicated themselves to the idea that they're not going to be part of the consuming class. They're going to minimize their needs completely. Right. So for example, people who say, well, we're not going to buy cars at all, you know because these contribute to climate change. What was the fundamental issue then at that point? Now, I think you have to read back 600, 700 years, right? In the singular, it's going to be hard to say. But I do think that we have to see this as a time of churning. On the other hand, given that we have the antecedents of this already in the 800, 900, this suggests that there was a churning that was already, this is really a churning, right? There was a churning that had already started where the supposition was, well, the Sanskrit language doesn't give us the ability to be expressive with respect to our religious ideas. We need a different vehicle for our religious ideas. We need a different vehicle for our spiritual feeling. That's where the bhashas are going to develop, the so-called vernaculars. I don't like the word vernacular because it's not like these are minor languages or just, you know,
Mm.
the vernacular is always in supposition to Sanskrit, but we have to use the term. These bhashas, Kannada, Malayalam, Gujarati, Tamil, Hindi, all of these, they're developing. Right? These languages are going to become the vehicle of expression of these ideas, and then people are moving away from these traditions of religiosity, which are associated with traditions of learning, right? Either learning, such as the Upanishads, or the whole idea of sacrifice and rituals, the Vedas, or even really what you might describe as these Sanskritic texts with their great gods. Because the gods here are, Vishnu can never be forbidding in the way in which um, uh, the god of the Jews, if I may put it this way, or the god of the Christians is forbidding, stern. Right? Yes, he has avatars, so he sends the avatars. Whenever there's wickedness, he sends an avatar. Right? You notice that, the Krishna of Mirabai, much more human too, in a way. Right? So the idea was to bring this religiosity to a level of what we might call, to bring it to a scale which was more approachable in some ways.
Got it. The last thing I'll ask is, what caused the Bhakti movement to sort of reduce or fade?
What's the question again? What is the Bhakti movement?
What caused the Bhakti movement to sort of not continue and possibly
Oh,
like taper off or
oh
fade?
how did it diminish?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the first thing is that, look, I mean, there are great Bhakti poets all the way into the 1600s. Okay. So let's not 1600s, circa 1700, we still have. Now, at that point, these languages, so I have also established a link between the Bhakti poets and their compositions and the languages, right? I've established that link. These languages now are quite well developed. They're really well developed. There are other works being written in these languages. Here, there's another consideration which I will not bring into the picture here, and that is that there's now a body of work which suggests that Sanskrit works continue to be produced in Sanskrit. It's not that it was a language that had completely died down or anything of that kind. But remember that certainly now, if you jump to 1800, so certainly in the 1600s, let's go back to that map over here. So you see Dadu, 16th, 17th century. 17th century, we're talking about 1600s. All right, and you have Chaitanya over here, and you see Tulsidas, 16th, 17th century. So that's what I meant. We're still talking about a relatively late time. And by the time, of course, that you get to about 1700, by that point, there's already a European presence in India. And certainly by the middle of the 18th century, the British are going to have taken over, you know, parts of what what is called Bengal, and Bengal back then is not identical with what is now West Bengal, or even West Bengal and Bangladesh put together. The Bengal extended to parts of what is now called, Bihar, for example. The presidency was much larger, what became the presidency of Bengal. Uh, so what we're saying is that there are going to be other strands that are going to really come in, which are going to become very important. And then, of course, by 1800, we're going to also have um, uh, English becoming the language slowly of the elites. Right? So there are many things that are going to contribute to what might be called the diminishment of bhakti literature. This doesn't mean that that devotional literature was not written later on. It certainly continued to be written later on, composed later on, but the poets were not of that great distinction. However, what we're saying is, and that's why I did bring up the question of Ramakrishna Paramhamsa as an illustration, that when you look at somebody like Ramakrishna Paramhamsa, a great 19th century Bengali saint, whose most famous disciple would be Swami Vivekananda, that Ramakrishna Paramhamsa is a bhakta. He's a true bhakti. He's not a poet in the sense in which these people are poets. In fact, he doesn't write anything at all. There's no compositions attributed to him at all. What he did was he gave discourses, which were recorded. Right? I mean, a man called Mahendranath, known as M, by the initial M, records all of them, and this becomes known as this great work called the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. So it's not as though the tradition of bhakti had disappeared. And in fact, I would go so far as to say, in fact, that's where I really wanted to conclude, because if you look at this over here, you will notice over here. So these two slides, you don't know what they are, but this is the birthplace of Narasimha Mehta. Okay, this is a shot that I took myself when I went to Gujarat. Narasimha Mehta is, or Narsi Mehta, Narsi, known in short, is the author of that great devotional composition, which Mahatma Gandhi made absolutely famous. You've heard it. Everyone in India has heard it. It's impossible to live in India and not have heard the composition at some time. And that composition, that bhajan, is called Vaishnava Janato. Right? It's sung on October 2nd, on Gandhi's birthday, everywhere in the country. So why do I bring Gandhi into the picture here? Because in a way, Gandhi should be viewed as the last of the great Bhaktas. He carried on this line, and this Vaishnava Janato. So Vaishnava Janato, the bhajan, call only that one a Vaishnava. Okay, who should one call a Vaishnava? Who really is a Vaishnava? That's what Narsi Mehta is asking over here. And who was Narsi Mehta? And here's another slide over here. This is the exact spot where he would sing, okay, his composition. So since you have asked this question, I will just take a couple of minutes to tell you about Narsi Mehta, because this is a way of saying to you that do not imagine for a moment that the idea of bhakti did not continue to resonate. Now, the poets in India moving into the 18th, 19th, 20th centuries, it certainly did. It certainly did. right? And you can see it in Ramakrishna Paramhamsa. You can certainly see it um, in uh, in Gandhi. Um, Narsi Mehta is born into a caste of Nagar Brahmins. So it's an orthodox caste of Brahmins around 1414. And it's absolutely certain that his songs would have been known to Gandhi from Gandhi's childhood because these compositions were admired throughout the Gujarat speaking world. These compositions are also greatly admired by a man known as Srimad Raj Chandra or Rai Chandra Bhai. When I spoke to you at some length about Gandhi, I briefly mentioned him. He's a philosopher and ascetic with whom Gandhi had an extensive correspondence, and he appears in Gandhi's life. He counsels Gandhi and all of that. And Rai Chand Bhai was a great admirer of the bhajans, the devotional compositions of Narsi Mehta. Now, I won't get into detail about all the circumstances that shaped the way for Gandhi to embrace Narsi Mehta, because that's beyond the scope of what we can do today, right? Uh, uh, but he knew about Narsi Mehta's compositions, and they were actually uh, even sung at his communal establishment, the Phoenix settlement and the Tolstoy farm in South Africa, even before he returned, to India, right? Right. So this composition is very important because the attachment that Gandhi had to it, and then it became the nation's attachment to it. And I'm not exaggerating because Vaishnava Janato has been taken up. Even there have been renditions done by rock groups, by classical musicians. There are hundreds of renditions of this, right? I mean, somebody could do a whole book just on this one song, and the way this, and it's a very devotional song. I mean, in some ways, it's one of the most extraordinary works of bhakti uh, literature, right? Because here Narsi seeks to define who really is a true Vaishnava, right? And Narsi's views were see, he was a Brahmin. Remember, I told you he came from an Orthodox Brahmin family, but he would very often go to the Shudra colony. He would go to the Shudra colony and he would sing there. I One of my theories is that one reason why even when the Bhakta poets were upper caste Brahmin, that they would often go and sing with the Shudra colony is because these people were simple and modest. These Shudras were poor, simple, modest people. They have much less of an ego. When you have money, when you have power, when you have influence, when you have position in life, the greater your ego. And bhakti is all about, in part, about shedding the ego. Right? That is why it is said in many religious traditions, you're much more likely to find uh, true religiosity among people who are poor. Of course, the cynical say, well, they don't have anything else, so they turn to religion. If you're rich and cynical, that's the argument you come up with. And here, I'm not here to adjudicate that argument, but I'm giving you a sense of how one can look at the fact that someone like Narsi Mehta goes to these Shudra settlements and sings there. But what this meant was that he became outcasted by his own community. He was viewed as being impure, right? The very thing that Kabir is really talking about. And the word that Gandhi chose for the untouchables, Hari Jan, is Narsi's term. It's a word that Narsi uses, Harijan, meaning children of God, which is the term that Gandhi adopted in 1920 to designate the untouchables. So this bhajan Gandhi took to heart because it permitted him to enter into the state of being a true Vaishnava. Narsi says, what does he say? Vaishnava janato tene kaiye, je पीर पराई जाने रे पर दुखा उपकार करे तो ये मन अभिमान na ane re. Call him only a Vaishnava who feels another's pain as his own. And of course, that's what Gandhi's satyagraha was all about. You take the suffering of others upon yourself. Call only him a Vaishnava who feels another's pain as his own, who helps others in their sorrow but takes no pride in his good deeds. Right? And I would say, go so far as to say that Vaishnava Janata, that if you had to sort of capture all of Gandhi's life, let's say in one song, the centrality of many of his ideas, it's probably this particular song by Narsi. So this is, I know it's a long answer, but it's necessary to the question you had posed. And that question was, you said, well, what led Bhakti to diminish? Why did that movement could disappear? As right? And I'm saying that, well, there are different ways to look at it. Yes, I mean, we don't really have poets that are of that stature coming out of the 18th century. But then, certainly by the 19th century, we have another set of issues, which is that modernity has come in. There are now issues that colonialism has put to the fore. People's attention is being diverted to that, right? Uh, and of course, there are Indians who are beginning to write in English. Ram Mohan Roy writes in English, and his command of English is fantastic. Michael Madhushodan Datto, major Bengali writer, but writes in English, some of his stuff. Some, okay. You have a number of writers who are going to be exceedingly important, writing in English already in the first half of the 19th century. And I'm also saying to you that that if you look at Ramakrishna Paramhamsa, you look at Gandhi, you say that the Bhakti tradition continues to resonate. The idea continues to resonate, and it resonates today because these bhajans are unquestionably very, very well known. Someone could, of course, say that, look, a Bollywood song from a film is going to have a billion views on YouTube. If you go by views, yeah, the bhajans are not going to have a billion views, but they are going to have hundreds of millions of views. Believe me. Yeah, and these compositions are exceedingly well known, and they're sung.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Got it.
Okay.